talking, but not talking. Now I'm talking, and I don't know why I just had to reset the microphone for this, but okay. There we go. So, today we're gonna go over. Oh gosh, what's this? Why am I doubled? ¿Por qué es this? Okay, that's in the wrong place. All right, cool. We're gonna go over the code we've just worked on so far in our streaming sessions. We basically work together on learning how our languages work, our programming works, how the 15% looks when we're dealing with the beginnings of most languages, how those 15% can be transferred over to other languages. So potentially we're going to get into PHP today and go into some details on how everything we've just learned in JavaScript in the previous videos. If you haven't seen those videos, make sure you do go over them because they do play a big role in future parts of this program. And it is a beginner session, right? So we're still talking beginner stuff, but we are entering more complex advanced systems. But the explanations will stick to a beginner set because you got to consider a teacher that has taught one thing in a particular sense will not normally repeat ideas. And in the case of what we're doing here, keeping it beginner, but also going into detail, more advanced detail in a sense, I will still go over concepts as if we are all still beginning and growing together through our sessions. So let's take a look at what we have achieved so far. All right. So what do we have here? We have ourselves our code from last time. We're going to go through and check out what that looks like on our browser right here, like so. Cool, cool, cool. We've added a background, made it snazzy. We've added in some functionality in JavaScript. The functionality that we have is through a logical if state, if logic, if else logic containment. The little style here is basically the background, right? So this is back to where we started with HTML. Basically, the design, right? The design of our page is all going to be based here. Kind of move my microphone. Testing. Okay. It keeps cutting out for some reason. So, so my hand doesn't touch the cable. I need to upgrade my mobility here, but because I'm not in the same location as normally, you are going to hear some cats in the background. I'm babysitting a bunch of cats, and they're probably going to make a debut at some point, sometime. But when we're looking at our styles, all this is doing is simplifying the design. We've got the background URL file, which is simply this file here. Some small little adjustments to the text, the background images, and all that jazz. And that's really it. We didn't do too much designing because we're really focusing on not design, but the back-end mechanics of programming, how we use programs to create functional applications. So, the first key here is to recall the two interfaces that make up our whole program. We've got an input ID, which is simply the input space here that I can write some text. And then the command button, which activates when I click it, the press me button here. And I can change that, of course, within the text here. Let me maybe move this up a bit, huh? Until we get more people coming in. And we've got the press me button here that's essentially going to activate the function. Whatever we decide to put in that little box for the input is going to initiate commands for us. Now we've got through a lot of details. So this isn't going to go through full set of details of what we've gone through, but make sure to like, subscribe, and go to the other videos in the beginners list of my playlist to really go over all the details of, in this sense, how we're organizing our website queries, how we're basically searching Google, how we got this URL, and how we basically use these variables or these arrays to control whether we search Google, YouTube, DuckDuckGo, Yahoo Finance, or basically anything you decide to add in here, completely customizable. But there's a process you got to follow in order to be able to find the correct URL for you to modify. Then we got our little add event listener and the keylogger session where we basically have a listener telling us what is being pressed at that moment. And there's ways we can control the mouse clicks and a lot of other listeners available for us. But for now, this is a very important listener for the key up, key down, or key press, because this is also how you can create some games in JavaScript. If you wanted to have a controlling factor in your games, this is how you can make movement happen within that particular game by detecting first the listener to activate a detection, and then you run a function that will listen to the specific key. For us, we just kind of did a little enter because I got tired of pressing that button. So I decided to add a little listener for the enter, which will initiate the same exact function, button click. The same function that is also being activated when I press the button. Even though we are using the enter button to activate it here we're actually activating it using the press me button that it's uh, created with. But where does this function go? Well, it's our main control space. This is where we activate certain commands. Those commands are activated by specific inputs. We take the input, the user input, from this text with this line here. We go into the document, get the ID of the user input, and then grab the value inside. We split it up into a smaller set of array values. We've even printed it out. We went through all the little array ideas behind how we can go and separate text with spaces into their own individual arrays in previous videos. So make sure again, all of these relevances will be in those videos to show you how you can create commands of your own for your own programs. Then we run it through a if parser. We're basically logically trying to find what command we're running. We've got a G command to go to Google and search, YT to search for YouTube stuff, DDG, YF for what Yahoo Finance. And then we also created a battle simulator where we created a fight sequence between multiple, well, in this case, just two players, but can be extended to three or four, but in a churn-based process with a class and object type. So this was specifically to show how to create objects and classes and how they relate to each other and what can be done with them as far as managing our program. Now, the OOP of this, the object-oriented programming of this, is more like a opinionated recommendation. You can still program without using those, and many times you'll find it to be quite simple, especially for simple tasks. But as your program does gain traction and grow, it's probably best to organize it within objects and classes to basically simplify modifications and basically clean up reusable code, just like functions. And then we got a little weather here where we go to an API online. This is where we're going to now pivot from because we go online to grab weather data from a function that we created right here, which is down here. It is the openweathermap.org API. And from there, we can parse information. Now, I had a little bit of a, uh, brain fart when I got to parsing the data that we got. So considering now I kind of fixed it from in between, I basically forgot to do a return. Now, this is the more complex space. We got to consider a couple of features here because there's a order of operation that's happening in the program that is quite ordered. One, step two, and step three. And they all have to run in that particular order each time. So let's take a look at that. That was a session that I was teaching. Excuse that. So from here, we have the first case, which is the fetch. So the fetch will grab from the API URL, which is right here. It's a long string, which is a URL directing to the weather location that we want to grab. We do have to make sure it is a GET request. We've talked about GET requests, and we're going to expand potentially into PUT requests soon. But for now, we're considering, hey, we're using a URL to grab data online. When we use that URL, we got to have an API key that will give us access. So that's one of the things we talked about in the previous video on how to grab a API key and then use it for your program. Now from here, once the fetch is complete, this is where it starts to really go step by step. Once fetch is complete, the then takes over. Then we'll continue the process and then take the response from the fetch, which is literally just getting information from the website. The website brings back our info, and then we input this into the RESP variable for response, or just short resp. Now, the kind of, I guess, baffling concept here. This in itself is a short function. It doesn't have a name, and therefore it only runs in this location. And this is very specific to JavaScript. JavaScript's got some nice little shortcuts we can use with functional programming where we don't really need to create a function for it, which we technically can if we really wanted to. But in order for us to basically squeeze in a little bit of code in small spaces that does something simple, we use the format parenthesis and then equal arrow, basically stating, hey, go to this curly brace, and then the code we want to activate, and then close the brace. This is just a shortcut to basically create short snippets of code and run it at that location without actually creating a function name. And you can tell the function name is normally right in the front. We have function and then get weather, and then we see the regular parentheses after is the curly brace. In this case, there's no name here. It's just the regular parentheses. And we've got this little nice equals greater than symbol here to signify it's pointing to a running function in the brackets. So this is a shorthand for creating small blocks that we can run really quickly without having to name the function, but it's nice for us to really use in certain cases, and this is one of them. Because now, when we are indeed running the response, we're taking that response and we are converting it to JSON. Now, when we take information from any online source, it always comes back as text. So this response is just a plain TXT type format, nothing fancy. But the programming, the JavaScript, doesn't use text, it just shows text. When we're trying to see what's inside of a variable, it'll present itself as text, but in the end, it's going to also really give us a type of view of what it is. It's going to convert it to text because the actual program is treating it as a type of object. So when we're dealing with this, we can't send JavaScript objects from computer to computer online. There's just no way. The formatting will get lost. The process is a lot more complex. And many times we may want to not just send a file or a set of data from JavaScript to JavaScript. We can send it from JavaScript to Python, JavaScript to PHP, JavaScript to C++. All of those can read online-based data. So what this really does is just says, hey, we're going to standardize network traffic data as text, and when you bring it in from a network fetch, then you can just convert it to whatever you want. And in our case, we're taking it into the format called JSON. We're now converting it to JSON, returning it. This is what I forgot last time. We have to return it, which means now we go to the next then. So first fetch, then this then happens, and finally the return of the JSON now is the data. So the JSON is now inside of this data variable. It's just a JSON piece of text, or at least converted now to an object. And we get to print it out and even further, use the information inside to print it out somewhere on the screen. Maybe we have ourselves a place that we want to place the weather and location and all the extra details. But here's how it works. I'm going to go to inspect, show the process. And when we're doing any sort of fetching process, we are now accessing the network. So we can go into the inspector and then the network tab to see what's happening in the background. Actually, very important to do this because sometimes data can get a little confusing. Here's the case now. We have weather. I press this. Our weather runs, it grabs information, it gives it basically the token ID to grab data. You can basically get a API token for free. That's the one I'm using here. Then we send it with some default coordinates, nothing too fancy here. This set of default coordinates can be modified in the future where we actually basically throw information after the weather, like maybe 50 and 50, and then modify those values to be that coordinate. But for now, we're just making sure the network connection is working well. So that's essentially the left off space we were in. Now, if I go to console, there's our print on the console log data. This is where our actual information comes back. The stations, the clouds in the specific case covered, the coordinates that we sent in, the main temperature, feels like humidity, all the details that that website now gives us is now given to us in our local application. And that was the example for us to basically go online and grab information from any website that does provide data to us. This is what makes basically the meaning of JavaScript really good for us. When we program in JavaScript, we have access through browser communication to access anything online. And this is where the power of JavaScript really does extend to getting anything we want from an online source, bringing it to our own page, and then from there, do whatever parsing we need in order to figure out the next steps. So that is the start. For the next case, we want to extend this because not only do we get the ability to access online, we have the ability to create our own server on our own computer. And that starts with a couple of setup processes. So for today, I'm going to show you how to set up a PHP server that we can essentially apply this same concept. We can create our own server on our own computer and it'll be secure, accessible only through the local host unless you do some configurations to it, but a great place for developers to extend their abilities not only on the client side, on the JavaScript, on the Chrome browser, but now expand into the actual server side. And this is the case here. We've contacted a server with a fetch here to grab the information from that server, bring it back to us, and then get information. Now we can program the server with the next steps. For any time we're doing this, we are going to need XAMPP. XAMPP is a application that lets us host a server on our own system. And from there, use PHP to code that system or that server. It's a free open source system. It uses Apache MariaDB, which basically programs in PHP and Perl. But in our case, we're really going to be focusing on the PHP part. First thing you want to do, select the system you're in. My case, I'm Windows, so I've installed the Windows XAMPP, and then here's what it looks like. I gotta bring it up over here in my little space. You open up the control panel, you search for it after installation. Does not find your device. Yay. Okay. Let me see. It's been a while since I used it. That makes no sense. It's right here. Okay, there it is. So yeah, whenever you install it to whatever directory you have it in, you can always use the XAMPP-control.exe to start up the server control panel. Well, for now, we don't want MySQL yet. We can also have a FileZilla server, which is pretty cool for transferring files between systems. But for us, we're going to start working with Apache. there's something to consider about Apache. The first thing is we're not accessing the applications on the server as we normally do. We're not going to open up the file directly. We've only been just saving the file on the computer and then just opening it normally. When we start the server, what's happening? I might have to reinstall it actually, unless I haven't given it permission to run. Dependencies, missing dependency, problem with privileges. Okay, let me check some stuff here. Hmm. No, it doesn't look like it's in here. What if I run it normally? Portable SQL, no file directory. Yeah, okay, it looks like I have to reinstall it. I've had this for so long. Might have to reset the stream. But then continuing from here. So the idea is we don't necessarily just open up the file normally. I'll make this a very short stream because I do have to do some configurations and I do have a student very soon. So I try to jump in real quick and do some stuff, but it's turning out a little bit more chaotic. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. Anyway, with this, I do definitely prompt you though to check out the other videos to basically see how we got our current program set, what it does, how we programmed it, which is going to teach you everything you need to know about the first 15%. Variables and arrays, functions, listeners. Oh, there's a bigger function here with a bunch of conditions for if and else choices. And then, of course, a little bit about async functions. Functions that need to wait for data to pass back before continuing automatically. In this case, when we're trying to get access to information online, it's not as fast as a computer processing, so we have to wait until the data comes to us and then continue to the next sets of data. So that's an important factor to really get wrap your head around. But also, we do have some extra details on the file system here where we had some expansions with the JS, the JavaScript. We had a battle sequence here between players, a class that creates the player, and then a battle class, and then the process in which our battles take place. So very important to really go into detail to understand these factors because that makes a fulfilled concept of how to use the given tools in programming to really be a good developer, not to be someone like Pirate Software who just basically copies and pastes and uses magic numbers. If you know, you know. If you don't, you're about to go find out. There's just some developers that use all the tools in the toolbox, and then there's some developers that just use what they kind of know and then program inefficiently. And then it looks great. It doesn't look great to a programmer. It looks messy and it looks like it's a lot of code and it's so complicated. Like, oh my God, if you look at some of Pirate Software's code, it looks messy. And to some people that aren't the programmers, they're gonna look at that and be like, wow, he's so cool. But to the rest of us, we are using things that simplify. We do processes, loops, and functions, and all these kind of processes that simplifies everything. It's a smaller amounts of code. So we don't really consider anyone that writes a lot of code intelligent or a good programmer. Because if the better program you, the better programmer you are, the less lines you're going to have. And that's a fact because you're effectively using every little tool in your abilities to basically optimize your code and make the file even smaller. So if you don't know, I would suggest taking a look at some of Pirate Software's code and seeing what a bad programmer does when they're trying to just copy and paste a bunch of lines versus organizing code in the tool sets that are appropriate to make sure everything is smooth, runs great, and doesn't basically have 5,000 lines of code. That guy is really, I don't even want to talk about it. Anyway, so with that, those are the cases here. We're going to set up our server. So we're setting up XAMPP. And once we set it up, we have to consider one of two things. We don't necessarily open up files like we do here. When we're doing plain JavaScript, we basically find a file in our typical file explorer and then double click to open. That's just opening up a local browser. The Apache server that we're running from XAMPP actually has a specified directory. It's the htdocs directory. This is where all files should be put. So you can install this technically anywhere. You can install it on the USB, you can install it on your C drive, whatever you want. But in the XAMPP directory, you're going to find an htdocs. And then inside, you're going to find all the files that essentially lead to the server running that system. We're going to go into more detail on how to program in PHP and how to use this file system, but this is the very first piece of information to know. When you're working with PHP, you're not working with a browser. You're working with a server that takes code written in PHP and then runs that code through the server, which means that you have to have it in the directory that server is watching in. You cannot have it anywhere else on the computer or else it's not going to find that particular set of code. You need to run PHP from the local server that server is running from. And then you basically activate the ability to convert HTML straight to PHP. So we'll end it here. I wasn't really set up. I have to do a couple of house cleaning processes because it doesn't look my server is acting very nicely. I'm having some blah issues. I have to reinstall it and really freshen up the server because it's been quite some time since I ran this. But in the next session, make sure you do like and subscribe for more on this on how we can create a double-sided application between a server and a client, how to network, and basically expanding our beginner set mindset to more advanced code. And remember, JavaScript can communicate with PHP, and it can communicate with Python, and it can communicate with C++, and whatever you decide to combine. You can use multiple languages to really make a full out system if you'd like. Each language is great for specific things. So, if you want to find out more, do definitely like, subscribe, and join me next time when I clean up this stupid server and make it work. Because right now it's something about ports, missing dependencies. I probably locked down my computer and I don't have privileges. Something went wrong. So what I find that the best choice here is just to reinstall the sucker and move the files. The files that are in htdoc, moving those files to the new server, and then I'll come back next time and continue with the PHP side of things. But it's not going to be any different on the JavaScript side. JavaScript, we created a fetch application, just a little function here, that goes to the Open Weather Map API, grabs weather, brings it back, and basically just displays it for us, at least in our case, in the console log. This is the process for networking. You fetch information from a server. Here it is an actual website, but when we create our server, we'll be fetching from 127.0.0.1, our local host, our local computer. And then we can have real good control over what that server does, how it processes, and then make sure it runs on an online system in a control panel like cPanel or any other web hosting process. So from this point on, it's basically becoming the backend developer and the front end developer, and we're still going to be speaking in it from a beginner's standpoint because we're still going over the first 15%. The first 15%, if statements, functions, arrays, key listeners, and then we got some JavaScript classes and objects that we use. All of those are available in previous sessions, so do catch up if you haven't seen those yet and you're coming in fresh, because those are some pieces that'll be very, very good for you to know in all levels of programming, not just JavaScript. These are available in every single language, C++, Java, C Sharp, Lua, whatever it is you want to program in. Those are the first 15% you should master, and then you can learn basically any language because all it is just a little bit of a change in the way it's written, but those concepts stay. So now we basically are at our finale. We're working with a fetch function that can communicate outside of our page to any website that has an API. The next step, we're going to be the ones creating that API and maybe making in a user login, maybe creating a database, all kinds of stuff that can happen. But I would say that's more advanced on the further side of things. Databases get a little complex, and we're going to have to include some MySQL, which is MySQL is probably one of those languages that doesn't really fit the mold of the 15%. It's very much a, I guess, accountant's language. It's very much those people that crunch numbers. It's just that kind of language. So I'm not a fan of it, but I do like it enough to use it to create databases in the back end. So once more, thanks for joining. Appreciate you guys. And do make sure to like, subscribe, and join me next time when we continue our PHP project to create our own custom API and then communicate with it through our Stream workbench. Ciao.